talked about a week ago about some of the most important sporting individual performances that we've seen and the criteria that goes into it. Cade has a list. We'll get into it. But we wanted to bring in a third party. We wanted to bring in somebody who has experience understanding criteria, lists, history, what's big, what's not. How do we establish and how do we rank these all-time great performances? Paul Hembo, better known as Paul Hembo, a longtime producer on the ESPN radio fixtures and on Get Up ESPN. All throughout it, you see all of his stats, all of his research, and all of his hits that he does alongside Mike Greenberg. And all throughout ESPN, they just had their book released alongside Greeny. Got Your Legends, which ranked basically every single Mount Rushmore, every single American sports franchise in North America. How about that? So we had Greeny on a couple weeks ago talking about the actual book, but now we got Hembo in with us live. Paul, welcome in. How are we doing today? What's going on?
I'm doing great, buddy. It's good to see you. It's good to hear your voice. And I have to say, we did 3 of these sports books, the third of which you just plugged. But the second of these, entitled Got Your Answers, is probably the book that most rhymes with this particular assignment. It's basically 100 sports questions, all of which are answered in list form. So I'm curious to see how much overlap there is between the work that we did and the work that you and I are going to do here this morning.
Perfect. All right, so Cade, what we had a couple weeks ago, after the Shohei Ohtani performance, Game 4 against the Brewers, the 3-home run game, he had the 6 scoreless, 10 strikeouts, one of the best performances individually in professional sports history. Cade found a list, and Cade's list was, remind me, the most impressive individual performances in sports history?
It was specifically the best single game male performances in sports history for any sport all time. And the video I was watching ranked them as a top 20. I think maybe we could talk about the top 10 today. So Paul, pleasure to meet you. This is a particularly exciting moment for me because Hembo is always one of my favorite talent to listen to at ESPN West Palm, or considering he is Mr. Trivia and Mr. Stats, which is exactly what I love. So I'm excited about this one.
Hembo, Cade loves this stuff. Cade, this is his backhand right here that he's very familiar with. So he's going to get a kick out of this.
You got to raise your standards, though. I do appreciate the kind words.
So just to quickly go over the top 10 from the video we pulled to discuss this conversation, they went number 10, the Joe Montana 92-yard drive in Super Bowl 23. The Michael Phelps golden sweep of the 2008 Beijing Olympics, where he went 8 for 8 in all of his races at a gold medal level. LeBron James's stare-down game in the 2012 NBA playoffs, where he scored 45. Usain Bolt's 9.58 world record in the 100-meter dash at the 2009 World Championships. Michael Jordan, the only Michael Jordan game on this entire list, his flu game in 1997 at the NBA Finals Game 5. Diego Maradona's dual legend in the World Cup quarterfinal in 1986, Kobe Bryant's 81-point game, Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game, number 2, Muhammad Ali beating George Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle, and number 1 all-time greatest single-game performance from a man is Shohei Ohtani, 3-home run, 10K masterpiece just this postseason. Now, when we initially were talking about this, Hembo, Colin and I did not necessarily appreciate the fact that there were 4 different basketball performances in this top 10, that you really saw nothing, not even in the top 20 did you get a single golf or tennis performance. We also thought there was not enough emphasis on the situation that these players were in. Because as much as Shohei's impressive performance was absolutely insane from a physical perspective, it was Game 4 of a sweep in the NLCS, and we think that there's maybe, like, you think about Don Larson's no-hitter when he was competing in the World Series. It's the only no-hitter in the World Series. So
high leverage.
Exactly. So we're wondering, like, maybe how do we, if we were to go from scratch, we obviously see this list. There's some great, probably a lot of these will be on this list, but if we're starting straight from scratch, what necessarily would you prioritize when we're talking about the single game greatest performances from a male athlete?
Yeah, it's such a difficult exercise for a million obvious reasons. The most important components that I would be prioritizing here are A, leverage, and B, representation, which is to say, you can't construct a credible list like this without representing at least most sports somewhat equally, representing eras somewhat equally, and also accounting for the moment. So obviously Rick Wise throwing a no-no and hitting a couple bombs is a big deal, but it's not nearly as consequential is what Shohei Ohtani did to sweep out the Brewers in that series, which is why I view his performance as the greatest in the history of baseball at minimum, because it, of course, was dominance on both sides of the ball in a game in which the Dodgers advanced to the World Series. Nothing happens in a vacuum. I'm addicted to context because it is a single most important attribute of any of these conversations. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Doing context-free analysis is dumb guy commentary. You've come here to provide smart guy commentary. So when you're constructing a list like this, it's exceedingly important that the when matters just as much as the what. And in Shohei Ohtani's case, him doing that in that environment, also in game 4 of a championship series, is what makes that the single best baseball performance, at least that I've ever seen, if not in the history of Major League Baseball. But everything that you evaluate from this perspective needs to be through that prism. When did you do it is just as important as what you did.
So you're establishing, when you're making this criteria, you said context is everything, but also representation in terms of each sport. So if you're going to establish this, if you're going to try to make this at a macro level, all right, you got to establish what your baseball is going to be. You got to establish what your football, basketball, and in my opinion, I think you have to differentiate in some capacity college performances, at least on the football and basketball level, comparatively to professionally, because there are just too many to choose from at the NFL versus college football, and more likely the college basketball versus the NBA. Am I right there?
You're 100% right there. If you're going to, let's say, make a list of 20 such things, what you're going to have to basically do is create a top 3 to 5 for each sport. And then once you've pared that down, what you're then going to do is compare not like for like. So for example, in my second book with Greeny, we have a list of the top 7 Game 7 performances. So in order to construct that list, what you have to do is decide each of the, let's say, 3 or 4 best Game 7 performances in each and every sport, and then you have to compare them to each other. This is a near impossible exercise. How on earth am I going to compare what Jesse Owens did at the Big Ten Championships, which, of course, is an obvious, one of the great performances of all time that should obviously be in the top 10 over that LeBron James game and any number of other ones in that top 10. But, of course, a lot of people approach this stuff from an ahistorical perspective, not having read a single book in their entire lives. And that's also something that's really important too. I'm not making light of this because, look, we love this stuff. Like, as we're watching sports and as we enjoy sports, the most beautiful way to consume them is through the prism of what has come before. What made Shohei Ohtani's Game 4 game against the Brewers so magical was that we appreciated it because it was the only thing of its kind. We also understand that Babe Ruth, who was the closest thing we had ever had to Shohei Ohtani, went 1 for 10 in the games in the postseason in which he both pitched and hit. Shohei Ohtani hit 3 bombs and sent the Brewers to the World Series. So this is exceedingly important to me. If you're going to open up this can of worms, if you're going to peel back this onion, you better be ready to have scoured history properly. If you're going to go on CNN and talk about presidential history, you better not say, oh, I only think about presidents that have come in my lifetime. No, I need you to be able to talk about Franklin Pierce and Ulysses S. Grant and James Garfield and Rutherford Hayes. Just like if you're going to go on TV, go on the radio, and talk about what Michael Phelps did in 2008, you better be ready to talk about what Jesse Owens did in 1936.
Now, let me throw another thing at you. You mentioned the representation, the importance in the context of history. How about politically? Sports and politics are, I guess in a namesake, it's always been separated. It's supposed to be your escape from politics. But when there is a politically charged sporting event, in my opinion, I think that is the heightened moment of where you want to talk about leverage, where the leverage could be at its highest. And obviously at a team base, you got to think about that 1980 win over the Soviet Union by the ragtag group of college kids with the United States. You could go down the list and even go to the 72 Munich Olympics, which was the Black September Games, when the basketball team on the United States side took down this or lost to the Soviets in that gold medal game as well. There's a ton of different examples that you could do politically charged. One I wanted to throw out there as well was Joe Louis Max Schmeling, 1938, which was a fascism versus democracy lauded event. Even though Schmeling was not a Nazi, the Nazis used him as propaganda. Joe Louis knocked him out in the second round at Yankee Stadium. It's events like that, in my opinion, that is probably the most heightened form of important sporting events that will add to something like this. I think you got to have some sort of representation of a politically charged individual performance, at least somewhere on the list. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a well-made point. Sports and politics will be forever linked, regardless of what we want them to be. These are attributes of our society that are far too overlapping, far too much of a Venn diagram to avoid that. And I think the boxing match that you just cited is a good example of that. But obviously that was happening on our home turf. which is to say, what Jesse Owens did in Germany in 1936 is the stuff of legend. You want to talk about high leverage? There could be
Hitler
nothing
there.
more
Yeah,
high
absolutely.
leverage than that. Let me just run you through what he did in a week in Berlin. On August the 3rd, he won the 100-meter dash. On August the 4th, he won the long jump and set the Olympic record. On August the 5th, he won the 200-meter dash and set the world record. On August the 9th, he won the 4x1 as in the relay and set a world record. He was the only athlete to win 4 gold medals at the 1936 Olympics, and he did it while Adolf Hitler was there shivering. There could be no more significant moment in sports history than that, candidly. I mean, you could, I suppose, say that Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier, despite the fact that he had a pretty ordinary day that day at Ebbets Field, could be number one on this list in some sense. But obviously, that isn't so much a performance as it is symbolic. But what Jesse Owens did in performing, now, obviously, this isn't a single game. This is a single event. But the point remains the same. That's leverage. That's game 7 of the World Series with the bases loaded leverage, juiced up for all the obvious reasons. And our nation wasn't at a point at that time in 1936 where we were even quite ready for it. So I think that's it. It's an exceedingly well-made point. So as we watch sports today, we take advantage of the fact that these are luxurious things that we can appreciate and enjoy on a daily basis. Whereas 100 years ago, or close to 100 years ago, the world was a very different place. Politics were of disproportionate importance, and worldwide there was so much clutter, for lack of a better term, that I think the symbolism of what Jesse Owens did and the fact that he did it there on visiting turf, for lack of a better term, makes that, if not number one on my list, somewhere that should be at the very top.
Hembo, you talked earlier about how you wanted to keep a variety of sports if you were to actually make this list. Let's now get into the nitty-gritty stuff. If we had to choose a top 10 for this hypothetical list, and you talk about sports in particular, let's get the sports down before we talk about performances. Track and field, Olympics, I think that can all be wrapped up into that Jesse Owens, and that will most likely make this list. If you had to then kind of break down more sports that needed to be on this top 10, what would be some sports that had to be in this list? Would it be multiple basketball? Would it just be maybe one representation of basketball in order to get more sports in? Would there be sports left out? Because clearly on this top 20 that we initially started this conversation with, there's no tennis or golf, and I think both of those have to be in at least a top 10 before they're in a top 20. What say you about the variety of sports if we were to consolidate this down to 10?
Yeah, a fantastic question. So for me, Jesse Owens is on this list, and he's our track and field representative, for lack of a better term. You mentioned Michael Phelps, what he did in 2008. I think it has to be it. He won 8 gold medals. He literally went 8 for 8 every event he entered, and he broke the world record in 7 of them. So all of a sudden now we have 2 of our 10 locked in. The basketball one, to me, despite the fact that it happened on a night in Hershey, Pennsylvania, look, I think Will Chamberlain's 100-point game at least has to be in the mix, even though
it's a regular season game.
In a game that mattered. Correct, it's a regular season game. But it's 100 points, and no one has gotten within 15 of that. So it's obviously on the short list of honorable mention types. There is no tennis match that, to me at least, immediately comes to mind, because just the manner in which the sport is played, I don't think there is one for which you would say, like, oh, this is obvious. But what Tiger Woods, I would say, did in the late 90s, we can pick probably 1 or 2 or even 3 of his all-time great lap the field type performances. Like, to win the Masters by 12 strokes is an absolutely preposterous thing to have done. And so there's also legendary performances at the PGA. Like, he's someone that has to be repped.
Real quick, Hembo, I played college golf, and I knew that you were going to bring one of those up. I had written down 1997 Masters, win by 12 strokes, or 2000 U.S. Open, where he won by 15. One of those has to be in here. So you saying 1997, I think that has to be in here for a top 10, because Tiger is immortal in the sport of golf when it came to beating the competition. But please continue.
I think that U.S. Open also has just as much of an argument, because in 2000.
It might, and that's what makes this so fun. Like, what Tiger Woods did in those 2 particular events, they're the 2 greatest golf performances, at least, that I've ever seen, and probably of all time. And you have the numbers to demonstrate it. So, look, this is what makes this list so fun and so challenging at the same time. Because what we'll then have to do is compare what Tiger Woods did on that weekend to what Michael Phelps did in Beijing in 2008. That's so fun. And when you're talking about guys at the very peak of their powers, at the height of their professions, how on earth can I do that in good conscience? It's what makes, being a sports fan so incredible. So do you object, by the way, we're going to go off the rails here, but this is the fun part of this. Do you object to me having Will Chamberlain in my top 10, despite the fact that it happened in a regular season game that, relatively speaking, didn't matter at all?
I would put A a couple different ones come to mind. You want to talk about context? I want to throw out there 1980. Magic Johnson, Game 7, starting at center in place of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was down with a bad ankle, 42, 15, and 7 as a rookie, winning the Finals MVP and winning their first championship in the Magic Johnson era. I think that's one of the best performances unheralded in NBA history. I think that LeBron one is the most important win of his career, because if they lose that game 6, to go back to the Boston Celtic game, if they lose that game, there's a good chance that Miami Heat experiment completely blows up. So in terms of importance of his career, I think that's up there. Those are two that pop to mind for me. That's just in terms of context. Obviously, statistically, individually, it doesn't match up to 100 points in a game. You can mention the Game 1 LeBron when he had 51 points in a loss. You can mention stuff like that. To me, I think that the context of how that game was won, I think a lot of that has to go into it, which is why I'd throw those two out there just coming to the top of my head.
Yeah, those are both good. We have Magic Johnson's 1980 ranked as the greatest Finals MVP performance in the history of the NBA. I think Michael Jordan hanging 63 on the Celtics in a loss is one of the great performances of all time. And I think Jerry West winning Finals MVP on a team that lost is also one of these things about sport that makes it so beautiful, because you can recognize genius amidst the team's failure. So these are all ones that obviously come to mind. I'm curious where you guys land on football, because I happen to think what Tom Brady did coming back from 28-3 makes it the single greatest performance in the history of pro football. But at the same time, you could make a good faith argument and say that, look, the Falcons built a 25-point lead, and I shouldn't credit Tom Brady for that. Where do you guys stand on 28-3 in relation to other great football performances?
So it's interesting you say that, because that was my number one on the list, because not only was it the greatest comeback in Super Bowl history, it was also at that time the most amount of yards a quarterback had put together with 466. It was also 5 consecutive scoring drives at the end of the game. You could just consider that second half was probably the greatest second half in NFL history. The only two that I would bring up, and the problem is that these two, I actually don't even consider the list. The original list had Joe Montana's 92-yard drive at the end of Super Bowl 23. I don't even consider that, because I think that's just one drive and not necessarily a full single game performance. The other two that come to mind, because you have to go to a skill position next, because Tom Brady will wrap up the quarterback position. Adrian Peterson, with his single game record of 296 yards and 3 touchdowns in 2007 against the Chargers, physically was that entire offense. If you want to go even later than that, here's some history for you. How about Gale Sayers in 1965 against the 49ers, where he went for, as a rookie, 336 all-purpose yards and 6 touchdowns, which were both records at that time. So you can hit the history, you can hit modern. I think Tom Brady is a reasonable thing to say based on the environment he was in and the record that he broke at the time. Any one of those threes I'd be okay with, and Tom Brady perfectly fine.
Contextually, I think it's probably Brady. If you want to go on the individual performances, there's a number of different directions you could go. You could go single game defensive performances. You could go single game offensive skill position performances. But in terms of leverage, if we're going to keep that criteria of the biggest moment coming back on the biggest stage, to really we all knew Brady was the best, but to really put a cap on an illustrious career, I think if you ask Brady today, that would be the most important win of his career. And I think
agree.
because of that, it would take the list.
That is the night at which Tom Brady became my GOAT amongst all athletes across all sports, candidly. If you're going to go context-free, you absolutely nailed Gale Sayers. December 12th of 1965. I think he played, regardless of position, the greatest game that any player ever has in the history of the NFL. I mean, he scored 6 touchdowns, the average which was 41 yards, an 80-yard catch, a 21-yard run, a 7-yard run, a 50-yard run, a 1-yard run, and an 85-yard punt return. That game was played at Wrigley Field. For my money, context-free, it's the best game anybody's ever played in the history of the NFL.
And to float this out, so you mentioned, so that's one we two right there. NFL you'd put in. You got to consider, in my opinion, if you're going to throw a college one in there, out of nowhere, Vince Young's performance against USC, one of the more famous college games, if not the most famous college game ever played. First game USC lost in 34 games. Contextually, national championship level game. I think that would make the list.
That would be the college football representation.
If I had to put a college football one in there, that's one. I mean, college football's got such a storied history. You could, of course, go down the list. But I think in recent memory, I think that would be up near the top, if not the top, on the football things to wrap it up. Hembo, your thoughts there?
I agree with you entirely. If there's one college football game that would be represented on this list, it is that one. And obviously, college football's history is wide and vast. But until the late 90s, they didn't even play a national championship game. So how would you go about picking something that happened before then before then using leverage when the leverage has obviously changed over the course of time. Vince Young's performance against USC at the Rose Bowl in that venue, of course, and the manner in which he won that game in epic fashion makes that the greatest college football performance in the history of the national championship game for sure. If there's one from college on the list, it has to be that game.
Now, do you include one from college basketball?
I don't have any college basketball game number one on my list. I think you could probably go to a player's entirety of a season. I think if you're going to pick one, it's going to be Bill Walton, who basically pitched a perfect game in the national championship.
1973.
The game was a lot different then. Look, you know the stuff like the back of your hand. That would be the one. I don't know that it would crack my top 10. If you want to do an entire NCAA tournament run of success, maybe then if you put that into performance rather than single game, then you can have my attention. But Bill Walton probably is the closest thing that we would get based on his perfect game in the national title game.
Yeah, college basketball is interesting because there is just more games being played. That 1973 is probably the best of the bunch. I mean, you could bring up Christian Laettner against Kentucky in 1992, which is 10 for 10 from the field. He didn't miss a shot the entire, including that illustrious game winner to finish it, send him to the Final Four. That pops into mind. If you want to do like a season, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar lost 2 total games in college. Is the reason they banned dunking in the NCAA for 2 years. But so I agree. That's an interesting one there. So what do we have here? We have college basketball, we have college basketball, NBA, 2 NBA and 2 NFL and a college football.
So I only wrote down one for each sport for right now. We've obviously talked about it. So we have Jesse Owens in 1936. We've got Michael Phelps 8 for 8 in the Beijing Olympics. We've got Wilt's 100. Obviously NBA. We can talk about a few others, but for right now, Wilt's 100. Tiger either 1997 or 2000. Ohtani's 3 home run, 10 strikeout. Brady in the Super Bowl 28-3, Vince Young in 2008. That's 7 total. There's 3 left. I would love to put 3 other sports out there.
I have a tennis one as well if you need one.
Okay. We haven't talked about hockey. Yep. We haven't talked about soccer. And if you want to throw a boxing one out there, there are several massive matches, especially back in the 70s and 80s and 60s when that sport dominated a lot more than it does today. That's a huge part of sports history. Hembo, if we talked about hockey, soccer, and boxing, what are some massive games that come to mind?
Diego Maradona has to be. I think it was on the list that you mentioned. I mean, he scored probably the 2 most famous goals in history consecutively. Like that's the stuff of legend. When he passed not that long ago, and I revisited it, I actually went back and rewatched that game. The hand of God goal, and then obviously the coast to coast goal, for lack of a better term. That has to be the one for me. That was an apt inclusion on the list that you read. It's got that for soccer. It's got to be Maradona. Those 2 goals are legendary.
Understood.
Now, what do we don't have a tennis one. If I want to throw one out there, can't do. You could go match by match. You could go, Jimmy Connors at the US at the US Open or Wimbledon. But my thinking is, if you want to throw one out there and sort of make it about a run, Rafael Nadal, 2008 French Open. He lost 41 total games, which was like the 5th best ever. He didn't lose a set all tournament, and he beat Novak, and then he beat Roger Federer to finish it off in the semifinal and final. He actually was better in 2017, but he didn't play Djokovic and Federer. I think that's probably the most impressive Grand Slam title win ever, and I think it's probably the peak of the best clay court player ever. The most dominant facet of a tennis player is Nadal on clay, and him at the peak of his powers was that 07 a French Open run that he made. That's the one I'd throw out.
So, Hembo, would you consider that performance better? Because I think hockey has to be on the list. So would you put that over any of the big boxing matches?
I don't know, man. I mean, Muhammad Ali, you could argue Rumble in the Jungle, and you could also argue the upset of Sonny Liston, which really introduced Muhammad Ali into consciousness. That's the night he shook up the world. And
he was Cassius Clay and then after he knocked him out, he changed his name to Muhammad Ali and converted to Islam the next day, I believe. Wow.
Correct. You have the bones of that story correct. I have a hard time excluding Muhammad Ali from this top 10. I'm less convinced on the tennis, but I also don't have an obvious hockey win. I mean, we have Kelly Rudy saving 73 goals in a Game 7 in 1987 as our greatest Game 7 performance in hockey, but it didn't happen in the finals. I can't claim to be well-versed enough in hockey history to say that there's one definitively that comes to mind. That's the one that we have on our list. Is there a hockey performance that comes top of mind for you guys that would usurp anything that we've previously discussed?
I have one if you need one.
It's not necessarily a complete shutout, but this goes back to the whole politics thing. I think Jim Craig in the semifinals of the 1980 Olympics, where he went 36 of 39 and basically completely dominated the last 8 to 9 minutes of that hockey match against the Soviet Union. To me, that's the first one that pops up. Now, I might be biased because I think Miracle as a Disney movie is one of the greatest pieces of cinema ever.
You want to give that moment a little historical significance. You want to give it a piece of the piece of the list.
That would be the one I would throw out initially. But Colin, you got one too.
Yeah, so I don't hate that at all. I would just say if there's one that's similar to the Wilt Chamberlain 100-point game, Mario Lemieux scoring 5 goals in 5 different ways, still hasn't been matched. Did it, I believe, in 1988. Scored shorthanded, scored even strength, scored a power play goal, empty netter. It's just one of those bizarre games that you never see.
Yeah.
That would be one that pops into mind. But in terms of significance, obviously, the 70 saves in a game in a game 7 would be crucial as well.
I like Jim Craig the most of these hockey ones, to be honest with you. Again, we're going to go back to leverage, significance. That one takes the cake.
I don't hate that. I don't hate that at all. And so we're sitting on the boxing. I would say, you could say Sonny Liston. I would throw the Joe Louis one out there, but I would probably say the most important win of Muhammad Ali's career, the pinnacle of his career, was probably Rumble in the Jungle against undefeated George Foreman, the heavyweight champ. He was, it basically dominated everybody, and it was in Zaire, Africa. 1 billion people watched. I think that's probably the most important boxing match maybe ever fought. But I would throw 1938 Joe Louis, Max Schmeling out there. I would.
So I think, Hembo, we appreciate the time. Again, talking with Paul Hembo of ESPN and author of 3 of some of the greatest pieces of writing including
Got Your
century.
Legends, which just came out a month ago, which ranks the top 4 or the top Mount Rushmores of all the American sports franchises.
So what we've collectively done, again, all tentative, all up for future debate. Fantastic stuff. For our top 10 of single greatest male sporting performances, we have Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympics. We have Michael Phelps, who goes 8 for 8 in the 2008 Beijing Olympics. We have Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game. We have Tiger Woods. I'm going to just say the 1997 Masters. We have Shohei Ohtani's 3-home run, 10K masterpiece. We have Tom Brady's 466-yard Super Bowl 28-3 comeback. We have Vince Young's impressive 2008 upset over USC. We have Diego Maradona's 2-goal infamous masterpiece. We have for hockey, Jim Craig shutting out the USSR. And we have not shutout, but in that third period, for sure he was. And then finally, I'm going to go with Hembo. I think the boxing is a little bit more impactful for sports history. I will say Rumble in the Jungle should round out our top 10. Hembo, when you hear the list after you said this was basically an impossible task, what do you think?
I think we should write a book together.
I'm here.
I'm all for having more fun.